Hello and welcome back to Raised by Giants, where we talk all things spirituality. I'm Ryder Lee. Tonight we have special guest, Dr. Joesph Farrell. But before I introduce him, Raised by Giants is on Rokfin. Go over there, set up a Rokfin account. I release one premium video a week over there and is less than a YouTube premium account, and you'll get my premium content when it gets released and all of the other creators' premium content as well. Check the link in the description to sign up for the video streaming platform Rokfin. Also, if you would like to make a donation to help the channel grow and produce more content, you can donate on PayPal or buy me a coffee to help support my work. It is 100% completely optional and is unfortunately the only alternative other than monetizing, and we know what happens to channels like this when monetization gets involved. And I want to keep this channel. I like being here on YouTube, so if you can donate, I'd very much appreciate it. No donation is too small. And a big thank you to everyone that's donated so far. I appreciate you all so much for your kind and generous donations. Check the link in the description for donation options. Thank you. So without further ado, introducing tonight's guest, I'm very excited to speak with him, Dr. Joesph Farrell. Joesph was born and raised in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. Joesph has a doctorate in patristics from University of Oxford and pursues research in physics, alternative history, science, and strange stuff. His book, The Giza Death Star, was published in the spring of 2002 and was his first venture into alternative history and science, following a paradigm of researching the relationship between alternative history and science. Farrell has followed with a stunning series of books, each conceived to stand alone, but each also conceived in a prearranged sequence. Hello, Dr. Joesph, and welcome to the show. Thanks so much for coming on. I'm very excited to speak with you. How are you doing?
I'm fine. Thanks for having me on.
Well, I really appreciate your time here today. And, I wanted to bring you on to talk about the UFO disclosure stuff that's happening, Die Glocke, and these breakaway civilizations that you've written about a lot in your books. And, I've listened to a lot of your shows on Dark Journalist, the wonderful things that he's doing over there. And I've read your books. Well, I mean, I haven't read all of them. I have read the Covert Wars and Breakaway Civilizations. You have so many books, it's hard to read all of them. How many have you written so far?
Counting everything I did back in my academic days, I think it's standing about 38 or 39.
Incredible. It's a huge library. So I guess where I wanted to kind of start this off with, based on your research and others' research, like Walter Bosley and a few others, I've recently discovered that there's a huge cover-up going on within the UFO and alien narrative, definitely when it comes to governmental disclosure. And I admit, in the beginning, I was kind of fooled too by these craft, maybe possibly being extraterrestrial. But what I've learned is just because we don't know what it is doesn't mean that it's from off the planet. And I was reading your book, Covert Wars and Breakaway Civilizations, and it's very, very detailed, by the way. And there's a question that you raise in there about how far back does the SSP, the secret space programs, and breakaway civilizations go. So for the audience, I think that it's important to establish kind of a root basis here and go back to the beginning. So how far back does this emergence of the SSP and breakaway civilizations go?
Well, in my opinion, my friend Walter Bosley and I are a bit disagreed on this, but I'll give my opinion and reference his. We're both agreed in that we do think that the Second World War is the beginning where you can see clear outlines of both a public space program or a public face of space technologies, and then a very secretive one. And of course, for me, the public face of of the space program begins in Nazi Germany with the so-called vengeance weapons, the V2 and so on and so forth, rockets basically. But if you look at what Nazi Germany is up to, they had a vast, truly vast, very, very secret research program. I tend to think that most of the post-war American program is modeled on Nazi Germany, and even including institutes like the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. I think that's very clearly modeled on the Kammerstab inside of Nazi Germany. You see the rockets, but then when you get to things like Die Glocke or the Bell, that is a super secret space program. So in other words, you've got a 2-track system in Nazi Germany where you have the obvious secret weapons that are raining down destruction on London, and then you've got the stuff that is so secret no one knows about it until after the war. Now Bosley has the idea that the 19th century airship mystery is the real beginning of the secret space program, and I tend to agree with him to the extent that he's arguing that when you turn to the 19th century airship mystery, you have a clear case of a technology that's visible, that people are seeing, and in some cases even interacting with. And it's those cases where they're interacting with the technology that you have reports of, human beings on the ground talking to human beings that are crews of these things that are flying around. So again, you've got a very secret space program there of some sort. You've got at least a secret aviation program. So in terms of modern times, I think you can look to those two things: the 19th century airship mystery being a kind of a secret technology program, and then the real push, I think, happens during World War II, and the largest push comes from the Nazis.
Yeah, it's really interesting, the inner workings of the airships from Delsau and that Peter Minnis was working on in the mid 1800s, which looked a lot like the German Bell and the Rokfin turbine that the founder of the field of thermodynamics, I believe his name was Macarin Rokfin, I believe was his name, and him working on.
It's not ringing a bell, but I do agree that there's some of those Delsau paintings are very curious in that they do seem to indicate something like, I remember one in particular, it's probably the one you're thinking of. One in particular looks a lot like the Nazi bell. So, who knows what was going on back then? It was clearly a time when there were people working secretly on a lot of things. Just think of Tesla. Tesla conducted a lot of his experiments in Colorado Springs and did so more or less in secret, and then eventually published his notes. But he was a very kept to himself man, and did a lot of his experiments in private, and then would patent what he discovered and make it public.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And what do we know about the Die Glocke Bell? Because according to your book,
it's Die Glocke.
Die Glocke. I thought it was Die Glocke.
No, German. It's German. It's like the word Die Glocke.
Die Glocke.
Just for your information.
Awesome, thank you. So, what do we know about this? Because according to your book, it had to have a lot of electricity running to it, and basically all that it would do is just lift up off of the ground. And these facilities that this technology was in were huge.
Oh, they're gigantic. They're gigantic. In fact, one of the names of one of the facilities that is close to the facilities where the bell was tested is called Der Riese, the giant, because it's this enormous underground facility. It's important for people to understand what I did in my books about the bell. Basically, I have 3 books that examine the Bell story in detail, and they are the SS Brotherhood of the Bell, Secrets of the Unified Field, and The Philosopher's Stone. And the reason I spread it out over those 3 books is that the real story of the bell was broken by a Polish researcher by the name of Igor Witkowski, who wrote a book in Polish and then published it subsequently in English called The Truth About the Wunderwaffe. It's an excellent book. If you can find it and get a hold of it, it's an excellent book to read because he really goes in depth into a lot of the unknown secret wartime German research projects, including the bell. What he does in that book with the bell is he outlines a lot of details that he uncovered about the story. Most of those details are based on the affidavit of an SS general, a war criminal that was tried in Poland after the war by the name of Jakob Sporenberg. And General Sporenberg is the one who laid out for the Polish courts the details about the bell. Now, this is an evidentiary problem because we're relying on an SS general's hearsay report to a Polish war crimes trial after the war, and we don't have access to either the trial transcript or the affidavit. Okay. So what I did in my books is I simply said, okay, how do we verify this story? Can we do so contextually? Can we look at the details of the story and then look at German science, German scientists, German engineers, and see if anything that they were doing matches the story? In other words, can we reverse engineer the process of reasoning going on in their heads when they set up this project? And in my opinion, the answer is a resounding yes. You can do that. The details are detailed enough that you can kind of reconstruct what might be a putative physics behind the thing. And you mentioned electrical power, and this is one of those details in Witkowski's book that I latched onto because it's a telltale detail. The German nickname for the bell was Der Bienenstock, the beehive. And the reason the Germans called it the beehive was because it made this buzzing sound when it was running. Now, I thought that was very interesting because if you listen to those videos of Tesla testing his electrical devices, you'll hear this buzzing sound. And what that buzzing sound is it's a rapid open and closing of an electrical gate. In other words, it's a signature that you're pulsing something with a lot of electricity. And it's also a signature of something else. It's a signature of direct current electricity. And that tied into another detail that Witkowski talked about in his book, in that the Germans had a power plant, an electrical power plant right there where they were testing the Bell device. And I thought, well, why do you do that? Well, you do it if that electrical power plant is trying to supply you with a lot of direct current electricity. Direct current electricity, thank goodness we didn't go to that system. Otherwise, we'd have a power plant in the country every 2 or 3 miles.
Would this be the source of the high amounts of radiation that were reported to be coming off of the bells because of all the?
No. The Bell story, another detail that Witkowski puts in his books, and again, you have to understand, he's just putting out the details. What I'm doing is I'm picking up on the details and speculating what they might mean or what they might indicate. So Witkowski says that in the center of the bell, which had these counter rotating drums, they would inject this substance that was codenamed serum 525. Okay. And supposedly this substance was heavy, gooey, it was a liquid, but more like a goo or more like a pudding than running water. So it was heavy, it was a gooey liquid, and it was cherry red. And I thought, well, that's interesting, because the red color, if you look at it chemically, the red color might indicate an oxide. And we know that there is one liquid that is very heavy, very gooey, and is the perfect fuel for a plasma that you would pulse with lots of electricity, and that's mercury. Okay. And then finally, there's another interesting detail about German wartime nuclear research, and that is that the Germans were stockpiling enormous amounts of thorium. And I thought, well, why thorium? Well, thorium would be perfect for a reactor. You can make reactors out of thorium, but there's an interesting thing about thorium in that it has an isomer, thorium 229. And I don't know if you know what an isomer is. An isomer is a special kind of isotope of a radioactive material that has a nucleus that's in a high state of spin. Okay. And an isomer with a low threshold, in other words, what does it take to stop the nucleus from spinning when you slam on the brakes? Thorium 229 isomer is one of those isomers with a very low threshold to stop the isomer's nucleus from spinning. When that happens, it spits out gobs of radiation in the form of gamma rays, neutrons, and so on. So I thought, aha. So what we have is, with those details, what we probably have is some compound of thorium and mercury that's an oxide, thorium 229 isomer mercury oxide, that's being pulsed with gobs of electricity, which will stop that isomer from spinning, and it will put out gobs of radiation. So this is exactly what I'm doing in the book. So I'm taking all of Witkowski's details and I'm trying to reverse engineer what they might indicate.
Yeah, it's interesting because the Sonora Aero Club was also developing a fuel additive to
Right.
their spinning engines
Right.
that some have speculated was a spinning green mercury additive in their engines,
Might have been.
known as a soup. That is
soup.
how Del Shao was depicted it.
Yeah. Now, now what you're referring to is Walter, my friend Walter Bosley's reconstruction of the airship mystery. And when Walter told me what he'd run across, I encouraged him to write the book that he eventually went on to write about that mystery. And what I think is going on here, and Walter, I think, lays it out well enough so that if you look at it a certain way and combine his insights and my attempt to reverse engineer the bell, I think you're looking at one stream of concepts that were started in the 19th century and continued more or less uninterrupted up through the end of World War II and by the Germans. And interestingly enough, Walter makes the case that there's a German connection to the 19th century airship mystery beyond that of Del Shao himself. So yeah, I think something's going on in Germany that they're experimenting with some really, outside the box avant-garde scientific concepts.
Well, I mean, when you look at it, we have all these big events leading up after 1945 when World War II ends. Immediately the German scientists, engineers, and technicians were brought into the U.S. Operation Paperclip. And then a year later in 1946, Operation High Jump happens with Richard E. Byrd. And that ended in 1947, which is very suspect, short amount of time. What did they find there? Who knows? And later that year in 1947, we had the huge UFO crash. And then we have the Washington Flap event, which was 4 years later in 1952 over the White House. And then the Kecksburg event in 1965, which many have theorized was a German Bell technology. And then we go to
Well,
the
that idea comes from me, because I began to notice that the dimensions of the bell, the shape of the bell, are almost exactly what's reported for the Kecksburg incident. So I'm the one connecting the bell to the Kecksburg story. I don't know that anybody else has either said that or made the connection or even accepts the connection.
I mean,
But I'm the one.
it looks like it, right? It looks like an acorn. It looks like
Yes.
a bell kind of craft that they were working on
Well,
during. It
there's
only
a
makes sense.
there's a telltale. There are lots of details that are reported for the Kecksburg acorn and the German bell that overlap, but there's a very significant detail that to me more or less cinches the case, that appears in Witkowski's book and again appears in the Kecksburg story. And that is, Witkowski reports that according to Sporenberg, the bell, when it was tested underground, was tested in a room that was lined with ceramic brick. And to me, that was a real dead giveaway, because if you follow, I forget what his name is, Stan Gordon, I think, is the guy that did all the Kecksburg acorn research. If you follow Mr. Gordon's research, he interviewed a number of witnesses that indicate that the Kecksburg acorn was picked up by the American military, hauled to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Dayton, Ohio, where once it got to Dayton, a local construction company was contacted by the Air Force Base to deliver thousands of, here it comes, ceramic brick after the Kecksburg acorn made it over to Dayton. So I thought, well, there we go. Somebody in the U.S. Air Force, number one, knows about the project and knows that whatever that thing is, they better have a lot of ceramic bricks to keep it, inside of it. So, something's going on.
Yeah, it's interesting too how, and because we went to the moon 4 years after the Kecksburg event, and Walter Bosley seems to think that there was a form of anti-gravitics was used in the lunar lander of the
Well,
Apollo mission.
again, pardon me. Again, and I'm not trying to toot my own horn here. He's probably getting that idea from me, from my book, SS Brotherhood of the Bell, because, and this is a long, convoluted story, but basically, the man that was in charge of the Apollo moonshots, that oversaw the launch schedule and all of that going on at Cape Canaveral, was one of these German scientists, and his name was Dr. Kurt Debus, Debus. And if you dig into Dr. Debus, you'll discover something very interesting. He is not a rocket scientist at all. His specialty was high voltage direct current measurement and plasma, which is exactly all, one of the two of the areas that are involved in the bell. And what I've always maintained, I remember sitting as a kid watching the moon landings, I'm thinking, wow, this is cool. And I remember, I think it was Apollo 17, that I'm in the living room, laying on the floor like this, watching the television of the moon landing, and they're getting ready to lift off from the moon. The television cameras pointed at the LEM, and up it goes. The excursion module just pops up and away it flies. And I remember thinking, and I turned around and I looked at my dad and I said, "Rockets don't do that, Dad." And he says, "No, they don't," and he went back to reading his paper. But I thought, rockets, if you look at them, they accelerate geometrically per unit of time. So, they start slow and then they get faster as they go up. So you'd expect you'd expect not just this pop and up it goes. You'd expect, a geometric acceleration. And that to me is the clearest indicator, not that the moon landing was hoaxed, but if Stanley Kubrick is doing this, he could have done a better job of showing how a rocket accelerates. And no, what we're seeing is the use of an alternative technology to get us off the moon. Now, I suspect that what that whole thing indicates is that we made a deal with these Nazi scientists that we had working for us to use some of that technology. In return for what, I don't know. But that's my suspicion, was that there was an alternative technology that was in use during the Apollo missions, and particularly in use to get us off the moon. Why? Well, in the process of writing all of these crazy books, I discovered that Wernher von Braun resigned very suddenly from NASA after the moon landing. And it was after he had given an interview for Time magazine. You remember back then, Time magazine would have these little block things at the bottom of the page where they'd put a special little story. Well, they put a special little story about Dr. von Braun about the moon landing. And von Braun said, oh, yeah, once the moon mission passed the equigravity point, where the gravity between the Earth and the moon was equal, it then began its 43,000 mile journey to the surface of the moon. I thought, whoa, stop. Because if the moon is 1/6 the gravity of the Earth, as everybody back then was told, I remember reading my little kids' weekly readers in grade school, and over and over again, we're being told the moon is 1/6 the gravity of the Earth, and if you hit a golf ball up there, it's going to go real far, and blah blah blah. And I thought, okay. So von Braun is saying, no, the moon is much more massive than we were being publicly told.
So that would make the gravity harder for us to lift up off of the moon.
Bingo. Bingo. And if that's the case, that dinky little rocket in the lunar excursion module is probably going to be about as worthwhile as a bottle rocket on the 4th of July to get you off the moon. So yeah, there had to be, in my opinion, an alternative technology. Well, interestingly enough, after von Braun gave that little interview for Time magazine, he was dismissed from NASA. And he went to work for Fairchild Industries at that point. And to me, that's always been suspicious. You're dismissing the very man that helped get us, get us to the moon, much less off of it. So I thought, yeah, it looks to me like there was an alternative technology in play, and that some sort of deal was cut. And if that's the case, the only place that technology could have possibly come from at the time would have been some sort of feed from the Nazis.
Yeah, that makes sense, that we would go in a different kind of technology that was developed, and then the rockets was just like a cover.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that they wouldn't have to make the American public privy to the advanced technology that we've had, or that we've been developing, because we know that they're not going to release anything unless they've completely figured it out.
Right.
And yeah, they don't ever release any kind of technology or classify any kind of documents unless they figured it out and they got their stranglehold on it.
Yeah, the stranglehold, I think, is the key part of this, because ultimately you're dealing with a technology that if you have enough physics and enough engineering, it's relatively easy to reproduce. And I think that's been the real problem for a lot of this stuff, is they want their stranglehold first to be in place before they release this stuff. And the other part of the problem is, I think some of this technology is still how to put it, is it's kind of unpredictable. Um, it's an open systems technology, and therefore it functions more efficiently at certain times than others, and they've got to figure that out too. And I don't think they're anywhere close to figuring all of that out.
So when you said make a deal with the Germans, was this just a deal or a treaty or a contract to get us to the moon, or was this a bigger overall deal? Because I had a theory that I proposed to Walter Bosley when I had him on my show a couple of weeks ago, that
Uh-huh,
it was a contract, or a treaty with the Germans, like after World
uh-huh.
War II, from this breakaway civilization. Now, where they went to is up for speculation on my end. It was either Argentina or, like some people have said, Antarctica, but not 100% sure on that. But I think that we did indeed sign some kind of contract or treaty with the Germans after World War II for some of their technology. Is this am I on basis here, or am I off base?
Well, you're actually saying something that I have not thought about or heard before, and I think it has a lot of merit to it. I've been operating more or less with the assumption that this was kind of a gentleman's agreement. It was made over coffees and cigars in a smoke-filled room and handshakes, and that was it. You're proposing a much more um, formal arrangement. And when you say treaty, uh, I can see that as being possible, and here's why. I've been arguing that there's something, if you've read all of my books about what I call the Nazi series of books, I've been arguing that there's something very peculiar about the end of World War II. And that is that the only thing that surrenders at the end of the war in Europe is the German military. It's the German Navy, the Luftwaffe, and the German Army. There's no document in May of 1945 that's being signed by the Reich government until you get the proclamation of Admiral Dönitz, who takes over from Hitler. And in addition to that, there is no document ever at the end of World War II where the Nazi party surrenders. It does not exist. It's nowhere. And I think that's very, if you compare the German surrender to the Japanese surrender, when the Japanese surrender, you've got a Japanese minister of the imperial diet and cabinet and representative of the emperor surrendering on behalf of the emperor, the Japanese empire, the imperial diet, the imperial general staff, and the Japanese admiralty. In other words, everybody is surrendering. Okay, there's no doubt about who's doing what. In the case of the Nazis, it's very, very different. It's murky. So I have also argued that the other thing the Nazis did at the end of World War II was that they basically set up an international extraterritorial state that continued to conduct its secret research underground and behind a bunch of proxies. And by proxies, I mean not just corporations, I mean whole countries, Argentina being case in point. So could there have been a formal agreement between that organization and the United States? Very possibly, because there was a kind of informal agreement with, the paperclip Nazis. And we, to our chagrin, we discovered that these paperclip Nazis were basically reproducing their entire chain of command inside the United States.
They just picked up everything that they were doing in Germany and transferred it right here to the United States.
And moved it here and made us pay for it.
Same people in the same positions.
Yeah,
Unbelievable.
And make us pay for it.
Yeah.
So, talk about chutzpah, as my Jewish brother-in-law used to say. That was it. But Yeah, and on top of this, we have to remember that they had an enormous post-war financial war chest. I mean, you know, we managed to discover maybe $750 million of it, but it was much bigger. Um, a lot of the post-war CIA anti-communist fronts were basically Nazis. So it's all pervasive. If you're wondering why America looks fascist, it's because we made the deal with the devil during World War II.
So whenever you look at the 1947 event in New Mexico, what happened there? Because I think that this kind of ties into my theory about the contract. I believe that it was actual ETs, but we couldn't figure out their technology, right? And
Well, my take on Roswell is completely different than yours, and completely different than those who are arguing that this was extraterrestrial. I think it was a crashed Nazi craft. And I argue that case in a book of mine called Roswell and the Reich. Um, of the Nazi series and of all the books I've written that kind of touch on UFOs, that's probably the most important. Because as far as I can tell, the physics reported for the Roswell craft was never anywhere near close enough to be even an interplanetary craft, much less an interstellar one. That's problem number one that I have with it. Problem number two, I think, is suggested just by the hypothesis that what is the U.S. Air Force going to do if 2 years after the end of World War II, it suddenly discovers a piece of technology in the New Mexico desert that clearly has ties to the Nazis?
they can't come out and say that it was this German technology. The war just ended.
Bingo, bingo. That would be a disaster. So what do? Well, you put out, oh, it's ET is visiting us. You put out that story. And at the other end of the story, you put out the idea, well, it was a weather balloon. Yeah. Well, take your pick. Which absurdity do you want to believe in? And the idea, this is the thing that has always amazed me. Ufology itself, most ufologists that report on the Roswell incident that believe that it was ET, they will talk about the Shulgin memorandum, the Air Force general that made the intelligence collection memorandum about, well, this has crashed here. We better go find out what's going on. But if you read the memorandum, it's much more concerned, even in the fake edition that ufology likes to cite. It is much more concerned with finding out, well, this looks a lot like that Nazi stuff that we discovered when we went into Nazi Germany. And by golly, we'd better find out where the Horton brothers are. I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, the Horton brothers, and we're worried about them if we're dealing with a supposed piece of extraterrestrial technology. No, this doesn't work. But if you suspect it's Nazi, that makes it work. Well, where are the Horton brothers, by the way, in 1947? Well, lo and behold, it just happens they're in Argentina. And yeah. What are they doing in Argentina? Well, they're helping Juan Perón build all of these very advanced jets. That's what they're doing.
Yeah, was it our Germans or was it another?
Or was it their Germans? Who's doing this? Yeah. But that's another important point that I want to bring up. The Soviets picked up lots of Nazis after the war. And if you look at the way that the Nazis themselves were driving the division of the spoils, it's very clear what's going on. Because what they're doing is they're pushing all of the middle echelon management people toward the Soviets. In other words, all the people that can reconstruct the documents, that can reconstruct the blueprints, that can tell the Russians, well, they were doing this here and that there and blah, blah, blah. Meanwhile, they're pushing all the big name scientists, the Wernher von Brauns and the Arthur Rudolphs and the Hubertus Strugholts and the Kurt Davises. They're pushing all of them to the United Kingdom and the United States. So in other words, the division of spoils is almost equal. So they're driving the Cold War as they're doing all of this other stuff. It's really amazing. I know I sound like a nut, but that's exactly what happened.
It's also interesting around the Cold War period, the CIA was kind of really looking into these psychics, right? And these remote viewers. They're with Yuri. What was his name? Yuri
Geller.
Uri Geller and Pat Price and people like this. And there was this huge emergence of these psychic and remote viewers around that time. And I'm trying to make a connection there with that, but I haven't really come up with anything other than the CIA being involved in all of these projects.
You're looking for a Nazi connection?
Well, not so much a German connection, but just how it connects to the overall theme and how it could possibly be connected to some of this highly advanced technology that we had been working on.
Well, again, there is a Nazi connection, and it's a very important one. It's very little known, and I'll tell you in a moment why it's so little known. Prior to the war, and then shortly after the war had broken out, Heinrich Himmler, who was the literal leader of the entire SS establishment, Himmler was, as most people know, quite enamored of the occult. And he set up basically an entire branch of the SS, which was called the Ahnenerbendienst. And this branch of the SS was the occult research branch. And it was a very large establishment. All of the Nazi archaeological expeditions before and during the war were done under the auspices of the Ahnenerbendienst. Now, interestingly enough, at Nuremberg, after the war, at the Nuremberg trials, all of this evidence about the SS involvement in the occult was suppressed deliberately by the Allies. Most of the SS Ahnenerbe archives came to this country and are part of the National Archives, and most of them are still classified. Now, interestingly enough, when Himmler set up the Ahnenerbe, the decree that he signed that established it stated very specifically that they were to gather all of this information for the express purpose of seeing or utilizing any military potential that it might have. So in other words, Nazi Germany was literally spending vast amounts of money to establish a superiority in every category that they could think of. This is very much the modern American military attitude with full spectrum dominance. It's the same sort of thinking. The occult aspect of this, I think, plugs directly into the post-war CIA studies of mind control, remote viewing, and all of this stuff. I think absolutely this is coming out of the same time period and from the same group of people.
Absolutely, because it wasn't only the technology; it was the MK Ultra
right
kind of programming, the Monarch programming, and also
right.
Sidney Gottlieb was involved in some of these projects, as he was known for using hallucinogenics in order to create remote assassins, and was the director of the Project MK Ultra. And
I wrote a book on mind manipulation technologies called Microcosm and Medium, and it's a Lulu book. You can get it at Lulu. But I talk a great deal about people like Gottlieb, but also people like William Bryan and Jolyon West, the psychologists who clearly had some sort of tie to the MK Ultra projects, to the mind manipulation projects. And in the cases of Jolyon West and William Bryan and people like this, I think you have clear indications that these men were involved in trying to create Manchurian candidates. Sirhan, being a tremendous case in point. So yeah, I think all of that exists. I think probably mind manipulation technologies are the biggest threat that we face.
Yeah, and they've expanded that through the individual basis of doing it on people on an MK Ultra, mind fracturing, kind
Yes,
of traumatization. They've expanded it to a large mass amount of people,
yes,
and now they're doing it to everyone out in the open, which I believe is what their original goal was to do. They needed to
yes.
do the experiments on an individual basis so that they could learn how to expand it and mind control and manipulate
Well,
masses
if you
amount of
look
people.
at what they were doing, that's an interesting thesis. If you look at what people like you and Cameron up in Canada with his psychic driving, what they were doing to people on an individual basis through the use of trauma induction, I think you can see clear signs now that they've taken this public, in the sense that they're staging events that are designed to traumatize people. Think of 9/11.
Yeah.
That was a major trauma, and it was cleverly done in such a way that now every time that we dial 9/11 for an emergency, this is the image, or this is the subconscious thing that we think of. So they're very deliberately doing all of this stuff. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's a collective traumatization. They learned that through
Yes.
traumatizing people in the MK Ultra programming. And if you look at JFK, that was a huge traumatizing event. And then you look at
Yep.
9/11, huge traumatizing event. And then you look
Yep.
at what's going on right now in 2020, which I'm not going to say the name because it's a very censored thing, and I want to release this on YouTube. But that's exactly what's going on, is a
Yeah.
mass traumatization. And then
Yes.
they're able to program certain things into your mind, just like you were talking about with when you dial 911. They can program like terrorism, like
Mhm.
whenever you see a shooting or something like that, they just throw up terrorism on the screen, and then that gets everyone triggered right back
Yep.
to the terrorist of 9/11.
Yep.
Yeah, it's
Yep.
unbelievable. And then when you think, I kind of want to get a little bit back to the UFO narrative here, and because knowing that we've had this technology for a really long time, we've been working with these Germans to develop this technology, and from you in your research saying that it's more than likely that the craft that crashed in Roswell wasn't an extraterrestrial craft, it was a German craft. So knowing that, how many of these UFOs or UAP that they've rebranded it as, how many of these craft that people have seen in the sky and have reported do you think are actual extraterrestrials, or are they us?
Well, I don't view it as an either or dialectical situation. The way I look at it, and I'm kind of on board with Richard Dolan here and his approach to this question. And the way I look at it is, you've got far too many decent and good UFO reports for all of them to be accounted for by the secret use of human technology. And in some cases, those reports are of clearly indicating a technology, and secondly, a technology that would appear to be several decades in advance of our own. And I stress the words appear to be, because we do not know how far they may have pushed, humanly, how far they may have pushed in their secret research projects this technology. So I hold open the door in some of these cases, and I'm thinking clearly of the space shuttle footage, STS-48, where you had all those little UFO dots, and then all of a sudden, whoosh, you got something shooting up. It looks like being shot up from the surface of the planet, aimed at one of these little light dots that does what appears to be a 120-degree turn, a very sharp turn, and whisks away into space. And I believe it was Richard Hoagland who did a kind of back of the envelope guesstimation of what the speed might have been, whisked away at a cool 220,000 miles per hour. Okay. And all right, do we have a technology that can do that? Well, nothing that we've seen in either the public or secret arsenal since World War II comes close to that. Nothing. Do we have things that can shoot at UFOs from the surface of the planet? Probably. Is 200, and here's the problem though, is 220,000 miles per hour a sufficient velocity to travel between here and the nearest star system, which is Alpha Centauri? Answer, no. Because Alpha Centauri is 4 light years away. So in other words, if you travel at the velocity of light, it would take you 4 years to get from this solar system to Alpha Centauri. So in other words, what I keep trying to drive into ufology's heads is you cannot, on the basis of known physical signatures of these craft, come to the conclusion that they're ET. You cannot rule out, on the other hand, that the performance that we're seeing might not represent the peak performance capability of these technologies. But that's a question mark. We don't know. So in other words, what I'm trying to get people to start doing is argue from the evidence and speculate on the basis of the evidence. Don't just speculate wildly, speculate on the basis of the evidence. Now, if you want to take a 220,000 mile per hour dot that's jetting away from, all this other weird strangeness that the space shuttle is filming, if you want to take that and say that's extraterrestrial, fine. But what you've also just said is it's coming from somewhere inside this solar system. So in other words, ET may be much closer to home than we think he is. And of course, once you say that, that raises all sorts of problems, because now you're starting to talk about ancient texts and the wars of the gods and so on, because that was all, according to those texts, right here in our own little neighborhood.
I think the ET and the UFO narrative from being off the planet extraterrestrial is the perfect cover-up, right?
Yeah,
it's the perfect way to hide the highly advanced technology that we've been developing. And they've kind of, either way you spin it, whether it is actual ETs or whether it's us, they have taken this UFO alien narrative and co-opted it to be funded and promoted by the CIA counterintelligence people.
Let's remember, you just bingo, doff my hat. You just put your finger on it. Let's remember something that the CIA did back when the U-2 aircraft was, flying at hundreds of thousands of feet over the, I'm exaggerating, at hundreds of thousands of feet over the Soviet Union, cameras busily clicking away. What did the CIA cover up those U-2 flights? UFOs. They put out the idea, people are seeing UFOs. What they were really seeing was the U-2, a perfectly human piece of technology. Well, it was flying too fast to be human. Well, yeah, if it's at 100,000 feet and flying supersonically, it's going to be zipping along at a pretty good little clip. So, yeah, they very deliberately cloaked the U-2 behind UFOs. Would they do that now? Absolutely. Of course they would. These people are liars. They make lying their profession. Come on.
And the media is just eating it up, right? They're eating up the CIA ran disclosure movement of lies and falsehood, which I find very interesting. That we've been listening to the same agency that's been covering up the phenomenon forever to tell us, finally come out and tell us that it's real. All of a sudden, and it's wild. And then when you look at the UFO report too, they're trying to snuff out a lot of the independent UFO researchers as well.
Oh yeah.
Because a few months back in that report, they talked about having, you can't quote me here because I'm not 100% sure, but something like consequences for UFO researchers. So, I mean, there you go.
Yeah, they, in my opinion, the 2 secret space program conferences that I was a part of posed a problem to them, because you had a bunch of independent researchers getting together and putting out their independent research. And one of the things that was coming out of that was an emerging consensus that there was such a thing as a secret space program, and that it was not confined just to this country. The Russians have their versions of it, the Europeans have their versions of it, the Chinese, and so on. That there is a definite off the books technology effort, and it is directly related to space. Once you admit that possibility, then the idea that you must perforce be dealing with extraterrestrials, you've lost control of the narrative. And so what it looks like to me is the CIA is desperately scrambling to get control of that narrative again. I think personally it has no chance of doing that for a very simple reason, and you just said it. Who trusts these people? I grew up when I was 6 years old watching President Kennedy being murdered on TV, and then Jack Ruby murdering Lee Harvey Oswald on TV, and then we're told it was a magic bullet. So in other words, since I've been a boy, I trust nothing this government says, nor any of its agencies. These people are liars, and you're a fool if you believe them.
Absolutely, I agree with you 100%. And then the question really becomes in my mind, though, Dr. Joesph, is how do they release the advanced technology, or do they? Because this is what I think that this whole thing has been about. It's been about the suppression of technology. And I think that JFK knew about this technology. They killed him. Of course, that wasn't the only reason. That things just don't happen for one reason. It's multi-layered about it. But Eisenhower also knew about this technology and wanted to be open and public, and warned us of the military-industrial complex many times. But then you have the Secretary of the Navy, and later becoming the very first Secretary of the Navy, Secretary of Defense, James Forrestal, and being the first member of MJ-12 as well, was also killed because he wanted to release the technology and make it open to the public. And of course, the killing part is speculation on that, but his death was very suspicious.
His death is extremely suspicious. Yeah. Their problem is, and there are people that sympathize with them, with the government. I have no sympathy for them. And the reason why is they are the ones that have lost the trust of the people. And they deserve it. They deserve to have the trust of the people lost. Look at the grifting, venal criminal that we have in the White House now. He's a Chinese shill. Anyone with an ounce of common sense knows this. So they have lost the confidence and trust of the people. So even if they were inclined to disclosure, which I don't think they are, because their whole modus operandi is to maintain their power by the maintenance of false narratives. So in other words, if disclosure comes, it's going to come either as the direct result of an extraterrestrial intervention in human affairs that everybody knows about and can see and feel the consequences of, or it's going to come about by a collapse of the system and somebody else, some other terrestrial power revealing it. And that power, incidentally, has to be trusted. Otherwise, no one is going to believe them.
Right. And I think that that's the thing that you bring up there is that a part of the plan, though? Because it really feels like things are speeding up right now, right? And their whole narrative is starting to really fall apart at the seams, because like you said, I think it's a really lack of transparency and not telling the truth. They aren't transparent about anything, Joesph, not even the simplest of things. It's all been a cover up over a cover up. And I think that really all of the lies and the corruption is going to catch up with them within the next 5 years. But the question is, was that a part of the plan? Has this whole thing been a part of the plan all along?
I'm a traditionalist. I'm a traditionalist. I believe that there's a personal source of evil in the world. His name is Satan. As a fallen angel, and I know that this is probably going to piss off a lot of people. Too bad. Okay. As a fallen angel, he has a preternatural intelligence. In other words, this is one sharp dude that you don't want to go out and mess with all by your lonesome. You want to have similar entities on your side. However, because I'm a traditionalist, I also believe something else about the nature of evil. Evil is always irrational. It is always insane. There is, in other words, a direct link between insanity, irrationality, and evil. And ultimately, it's the nature of evil that it collapses because it reaches the point that it cannot sustain all the lies and deceptions that it's put out. That's where we're at right now.
I guess my theory kind of comes from looking at, history and the way that things have always gone. And if you look back, the public always takes the blame on everything, right? It's always been our fault. So why would this collapse be anything different, right? So
because look at who's exposing the fact that the narrative is collapsing. It's the public. It's the public. And there's something else in play. Lucifer means light bearer. Literally, that's what it means. All the technology that is exposing all of this is electromagnetic. It's light. In other words, I go so far as to say that we've been brought to this pitch of development by the evil one. But the evil one in this case is acting according to his nature, and his nature is good. It's his personal opposition to that nature that's evil. So in other words, the dude has managed to out clever himself. He's created a nightmare that he cannot manage, nor can his minions, Bill Gates or George Soros or Klaus Moloch Schwab and all of these people that, Dr. No and Dr. Evil, Schwab to me is almost a caricature of himself, because he's too much like the Dr. Evil from, the James Bond spoofs. Oh, I'm going to hold the world ransom for $1 billion.
Up that to $1 trillion.
Yeah, up that to $1 trillion. Yes. These people are so comical because they don't realize how silly they look. I mean, Christine Lagarde came out I think 2 or 3 days ago, big central bankster. And she comes out, well, old age is just not sustainable anymore. It's a drag on the world economy. And I'm like, okay, Christine, you're up there in your 60s and 70s. Why don't you be the volunteer that takes yourself out of the burdensome relationship you have to the world economy? These these people are just so comical and transparent with their absurdity. And it's going to get worse. If you think you've seen it now, just wait till you hear the nonsense they're going to come up with in the next couple of years. It's going to be very entertaining.
I like that. Moloch Schwab. Is that what you
I don't remember what I said. I do call it's Bale Gates to me, not Bill Gates. And yeah, Klaus Moloch Schwab. It's just these people. The thing that I find most interesting, because of my my traditional persuasion, is I've read all of these stories before. They're hundreds of years old.
Which is really interesting. What was that document that a group of people got together? I can't think of it right now, but to try and figure out how to take over the world, and they list environmental
you're talking
physical
about
change.
Yeah, the report from Iron Mountain.
Yes, the report from Iron Mountain, and it was
which is a hoax.
Yeah, that's right. It is a hoax. Yeah,
but it's a hoax, kind of like the Protocols of Zion. That's another world famous epic hoax. But if you sit down and read these things, somebody somewhere did a heck of a lot of research to put these things together. That's the problem.
Yeah, because we've seen it play. We've seen it at play. We've seen them going for the environmental thing,
precisely,
completely falling apart, geological change, and then now, boom! It's just aliens. Which those were the 3 main things that that they listed in that fake document, which is very, very interesting to me.
Right, and to add insult to injury, let's remember what Dr. Carol Rosen maintains that Wernher von Braun told her in the Rosen affidavit.
That they were going to fake an alien invasion?
Well, she maintains that von Braun said, here's the plan to weaponize space. First, we're going to need to weaponize space against the communists. Think Reagan and Star Wars. Then we need to weaponize space because of terrorists. Then it will be nations of concern. Then asteroids. And finally, extraterrestrials.
Yeah.
And by the way, folks, we're in the asteroid phase right now.
Whatever happened to that Star Wars project? That was a real project, right? It was by
absolutely.
by Reagan.
I look, I think Star Wars, the way it looks to me, and again, I'm going back to the way that the Nazis did things. If you look at what the Nazis do, they only make a project official after they know it's going to work. So in other words, the V2 rocket was being experimented on before the war. Okay. Hitler makes the project official in 1944. In other words, he makes it an official secret project after the proof of concept has been done and they've been able to make the rockets work. That's when he authorizes it. I think it's the same thing in this country. When Reagan comes out and says, oh, we need to have a missile defense against the Soviets, that's because they've already been working on it and they've had enough proof of concept that has worked to make it work. In other words, what I'm telling you is I don't think Star Wars ever stopped. I think HAARP is a part of it. I think kinetic weapons, the evidence that we've seen that those things not only exist but may have been used, I think that's a part of it. I think you're looking at the possibility that nuclear weapons could be, and here comes the term, obsolete, not just obsolescent, but obsolete within a decade. Why? Because if you can park a rod of God above the earth in a satellite and have it rain destruction down on the earth with pinpoint precision, you get rid of the nuclear fallout problem. You can cause massive amounts of destruction with those things. In other words, you make strategic weapons of mass destruction and wars winnable again. And that's, everybody's racing to space. Well, there's a reason for that.
Have they been hiding the directed energy weapons behind installations like HAARP and these other facilities?
Well, HAARP is directed energy. It's not even hiding. That's exactly what it is. It's a phased antenna array, and with phased antennas, you can actually direct the beam, the interference pattern of the beam. So that's absolutely directed energy. And we've been seeing this weird drought in the world, and there's no doubt in my mind this is being deliberately engineered. Mr. Globaloney tipped his hand a few years ago when he came out and announced, oh, by the way, we have this thing called weather derivatives. Now, when you start to financialize weather and financial instruments based on weather, in the good old insider trading tradition that is Nancy Pelosi, you don't start doing these things unless you have the technology to control it. It's the same thing with planned scamdemic bonds. They have financial instruments for epidemics. Now, why would you want that? Answer, because you control the market. You see?
So you control it, you know how it works, you can plan it.
Bingo. Ding, ding, ding. Ding, ding, ding. So, whenever they do stuff like this, I say, oh, well, they've got that now, huh?
It's unbelievable. It's right out in the open. They're telling us what they're doing, which makes me really question. It goes back to what I was saying a little bit earlier, that I think that it's a planned collapse, and they're doing it on purpose. I mean, why else would they be so sloppy and so lazy with everything that they're doing?
Yeah, but I go back to what I said. It may be a planned collapse, but when you throw the war dice, things never go according to plan. Ever. And here's the problem Mr. Globaloney has. He's thrown the war dice. That means things can spin out of control faster than Mr. Globaloney can fix a market. That's what I think is happening. They may have planned it, but the plan is falling apart. It's kind of like Operation Barbarossa, the German invasion of the Soviet Union. It was running like clockwork. Until about August of 1941. Then Hitler decides, oh, I'm going to change it. And then it starts falling apart, and we know the end of the story.
Someone just throwing a big, huge wrench in their plans. I think that it just takes one thing or one.
Bingo. That's my point. Yeah, all it takes is one butterfly effect, and the whole carefully calculated satanic schedule comes crashing down around their heads. And I personally want to be around to enjoy the show. Because definitely, no one is going to scream, I told you so, louder than me.
Oh, it's coming. I believe it's coming within the next 5 years for sure. So when you look back at the Washington flap event, we kind of talked about, what we think, what you thought Roswell was, that it was these crashed German UFOs or technology that they were using. What was the Washington flap
Are
event?
you talking about the 1952 flap?
Yes.
That to me, I talk about it, I think, in Covert Wars and Breakaway Civilizations. And I allude to it in a book of mine on Senator McCarthy, because we have to remember something very significant. McCarthy is at the height of his career during that UFO flap. And there's a reason that all of those transcripts were kept classified until 2003. In other words, Joe McCarthy and UFOs are directly related. Forget all of the crap that that American quackademia has tried to teach you about that. Go read the transcripts. They will stun you. Or get my Lulu book about him and go through that, because it will stun you. There's a reason he was shut down, because he's in Washington, D.C. reading the papers about those UFOs. And he's chairman of the Government Operations Committee in the Senate. So this means you can pretty well subpoena anyone you want to and ask them ticklish questions under oath. There's the reason for your Army McCarthy hearings. But anyway, just thought I'd toss that out there for everybody. Okay, back to the UFO flap. Harry Truman, and again, folks, I want you to stop and think. If you are thinking that all of this is extraterrestrial, again, it may or may not be, but I'll guarantee you that Harry Truman is not going to risk starting a war with extraterrestrials when he gives the shoot down order to the U.S. Air Force after that event. In other words, what I'm telling you is, if Harry Truman is willing to dismiss General Douglas MacArthur from invading communist China and dropping nuclear bombs on communist China in Korea, because Harry Truman does not want to start World War III. And at the same time, it's the same Harry Truman that gives a shoot down order to the U.S. Air Force to shoot down those cotton picking lights in the sky over Washington, D.C. It's not because Harry Truman thinks that they're extraterrestrial. That's my point. So in other words, when Truman gives that order, that to me suggests that whoever is advising him is telling him more than we are being told about the origin of whatever those UFOs were. And if he's willing to shoot them down, that means in all likelihood, they are human technology. And in all likelihood, he knows where they're from. And that ties directly to my thesis that really what's happening at Roswell is the crash of something post-war Nazi.
What's really interesting too is another case where they fired on the UFOs was Battle of LA too, which was in 1942.
Yeah.
What do you think that was? Do you think that was a human technology, or do you think it was?
Yes, I do, and the reason why is in some of those reports, and again, we all know that the military can really screw things up royally. But at the same time, I just have a bit of difficulty believing that, that the American military, which is already fighting the Japanese and the Germans, is going to want to pick a fight with somebody it doesn't even know about. Stop and think, people. So in other words, the military is shooting at something probably because it thinks, oh, the Japanese have something flying around our skies. And what's very interesting is that when you read those reports, some people, when they were shooting the flak guns at whatever that was, some people could hear the projectiles hitting something metallic,
ricocheting back, yeah,
and ricocheting.
yeah.
And okay, well, if it's hitting something metallic, you're dealing with the product of a technology. Now, it's interesting to me that after those reports start, you'll notice what happens with the story is gradually it seems like the shooting starts to stop. In other words, somebody in LA is putting out the word, hey, folks, the Japs don't have anything like this. Maybe it would be a good idea if we don't shoot at it. I mean, that's the way it looks to me, in all honesty, that yeah, you know, people start shooting at this thing thinking it's something Japanese, and then they realize, no, the Japanese don't have anything like this, so maybe we'd better stop shooting at it. That's absolutely the way it looks to me.
And it's interesting too, because it was before the war ended. It was 2 years before the war ended, was the Battle of LA. So it's like, well, if it was the German technology, then, or some human group, then they're kind of showing their hand on it a little bit, you know, like putting it out there in the open, like, hey, this is who we are. This is what we got going on. We've developed this craft, and here we are.
Who knows? You know, was it human? It may have been from Mars. It may have been from somewhere else. You know, there is a lot of evidence out there that a lot of the celestial bodies in the solar system were inhabited at some point, and that had, you know, that there was something intelligent out there. So who knows where it was from? Is somebody showing their hand? Maybe. Is it Walter Bosley's NIMSA group? Maybe. Who knows? You know.
Is there a UFO sighting or something that you think that could be credible extraterrestrial craft that could, you know, comes to your mind, that comes to the forefront of your mind?
The closest one, and I'll be honest with you, I'm philosophically disinclined to listen to stories of abduction or anything like that. I'm not saying they don't happen. It's just that to me, it's a bit like listening to evangelical testimonies at a revival meeting. It you know, okay, fine, you know, but I want the nuts and bolts. I want the physics signatures and so on. And the ones that stand out to me as being the best potential for legitimate extraterrestrial craft are the space shuttle footages that I mentioned to you earlier. And then there's another set of space shuttle footages where you see these, they look like discs, but they've got a little hole in the center of them. And then they've got a little notch, a rectangular notch that's cut out of one side of the disc. And then you see this kind of spiraling energetic pattern. And what happens in the film, some of this film was taken from the International Space Station as well. You see these things sort of fade into view and then fade out of view. And that to me could be a signature of some sort of stealth technology. It could be a signature of something popping in from hyperspace. You know, who knows? That this is the problem with interpreting these types of signatures, but that's what I like to look for, is something that would indicate this comes from somewhere a long way away. Bodies, you know, bodies and all of this stuff, that doesn't interest me, because that's too much like a charismatic tent meeting. You can make anything up and claim that it's coming directly from God, and you know, here it is, folks.
And the best way to throw people off of real research is to throw in all the abduction stories and the time travel stories and all that. And I'm not saying that, you know,
I'm not saying that those things don't happen.
Yeah.
I think they do. Case in point being the so-called Mandela effect. Well, I've experienced it personally. I remember someone that died that didn't die at the time nor in the way that I remember it. And I have a fairly good memory, and I remember things very, very well. So either I've experienced some sort of mass hallucination, which I don't think I did, or something else is going on, and I'm in the something else category. But when it comes to UFOs, I think there are enough cases of trace elements left behind, of physical evidences, of film or pictures of UFOs doing incredibly difficult maneuvers, if they are a technology, that would indicate that whoever has this technology, it's very, very advanced. So those are the things I look for if I'm looking for extraterrestrial stuff. And those two examples I just gave, to me, still kind of qualify as the best examples that I can think of.
Yeah, I think if the abduction phenomenon is actually real and is actually happening, I think that it would be done by our military and MyLab abductions.
Right,
A
right.
lot of people are, have memory and recall of MyLab abductions, and guess what they see during those MyLab abductions? They see German officers, they see German insignias. So it's like it makes sense when you think of the contract aspect that I was bringing up earlier. But what I was thinking about last night, whenever I was kind of preparing for this interview with you, I was thinking, well, people they've created this whole narrative around the fear of extraterrestrials, and they've hyped up this whole fear agenda. But what I think is more scary, Dr. Joesph, is more scary than a threat from outside the planet, from ETs, is what if we are the only beings in the universe, right? The only physical beings, that is. Like we're the last of the Mohegans here, and the implications of that, right? The implications of that would be that we are in some kind of sealed off prison planet, right? Because when you think about it, how many people have actually experienced seeing a physical ET? I don't think anybody really has, right? And the ones that have are pretty suspect in my book, because from my understanding, any ET contact experience is a consciousness experience, right? It's a spiritual thing. ET contact is consciousness based. And then you ask yourself, well, if it's consciousness based, then what are they really experiencing, right? Are they experiencing themselves, a different realm? Why does this only happen in the dream state or under the influence of some kind of hallucinogenic or in deep meditation, right? I think that there's a lot of, questions that revolve around that, and the implications. Well, if ETs don't exist and they're not really out there, then that means that we are isolated here, and that anything that we contact would be a spiritual or a translucent kind of consciousness event.
Well, you've got, as far as I can tell, you've got two different tracks or two different questions here. Philosophically, I tend to think that consciousness or mind, or whatever you want to call it, spirit, is the basic stuff of the universe. And once we get to that point, then the question of whether we're alone or not really becomes moot. Because if we're alone, then that puts us in a very privileged position in such a universe. And even if we're not alone, we're still in that privileged position by dint of the fact that we are intelligent, conscious, self-aware beings. Now, my little dog is, I think, to a certain extent, self-aware. I'm not one of these that thinks that consciousness is an either or proposition. For me, it's a continuum. having said that, your real question is, what if we are alone? And like I say, that gives me no pause. That gives me no problems. But you also used a phrase that I found very interesting, and I think it was the word or phrase that, we're here in our own little bubble, kind of a prison planet.
Mm.
And that metaphor resonates very deeply with certain ancient texts and traditions. In the book of Enoch, for example, in the Slavonic text of the book of Enoch, there is the idea that the earth is in a kind of quarantine zone that extends as far as the orbit of the moon. And beyond that is other stuff. And the real question is, why the quarantine zone? You only quarantine things that you don't want to get out into a greater general population. Okay. So if we're in a quarantine, there's another population out there that wants nothing to do with us. Okay. So the question is, why do they not want to have anything to do with us? And I suspect that it goes to all of those ancient mythological, religious, philosophical traditions that go to the idea of a war of the gods or a war in heaven or what have you. That there was some cosmic cataclysm that was a deliberate act of a cosmic war. And that at the end of that war, we managed to blow up several things in our own solar system and get ourselves into a lot of hot water and ruin whatever infrastructure we had around at the time. And basically, turn the clock back several millennia. And
that's what the Enuma Elish was about, was a cosmic war.
Yeah, the Enuma, if you look at, the Enuma Elish, according to quackademics, is a creation metaphor. And again, quackademia is astonishing to me in its ability to get so many things so obviously wrong. but yeah, the Enuma Elish is a war epic. The Gigantomachy in Greek mythology is a war epic. And you've got these traditions from all over the planet, including the Bible, of an ancient war of the gods. So why not take it literally? If there's a war, there's going to be a peace. If there's a peace, there could be a quarantine zone. And at the second Secret Space Program conference in Bastrop, Texas, back in 2015, my two presentations were based on that idea, that there was some sort of cosmic Versailles treaty that is indicated by the text of the book of Enoch. And it comes, if you do a detailed comparison of the book of Enoch and this quarantine zone at the moon and the actual Treaty of Versailles, you come up with some very astonishing parallels. That they put a quarantine zone around Germany. They told the Germans, well, we don't want you people manufacturing any more cannon above 6 inches caliber, because of course the Germans were building these enormous guns that the poor French had to, be on the receiving end of for 40 years. And lo and behold, when World War II broke out, by golly, the Germans come out with these guns that they weren't supposed to have. Funny how those blueprints, don't disappear. But yeah, there was a quarantine zone, a demilitarized zone inside of Germany, that the Germans were not supposed to have any military units. So it was basically, let's quarantine the whole bloody country. And make those nasty people, pay us lots of money for all the trouble they caused. Like the old Tom Lehrer song goes, we taught them a lesson in 1918 and they've hardly bothered us since then. But You know, the idea of a quarantine zone in space makes sense if all of those cosmic war traditions that humanity has since ancient times are true. So here's the problem, since we're talking about treaties. Is that treaty still in effect? And if so, were there reparations? Was there a tribute that was demanded? Well, maybe, maybe not. But it sure is mighty peculiar that when we started launching probes into deep space, we would always put these little plaques on that said, "We come in peace for all mankind. Please don't start a war with us." That's basically the message. So yeah, there's something going on.
Yeah, and we only went to the moon. How many times was it? 3 times, or was it twice after the Apollo 11, or was it?
Oh no, it was more
3
than
times.
that. It was 11, 12, 14, 15, 16, 17, 6 times.
So I mean, and there's that rumor that they were told not to come back, and that could have been a reason why they were told, not to come back, because
Right.
you can't go any further, you can't go past the moon because there's this zone that you can't pass. I find it interesting. I think it might have been in that Brookings Institute document, the fake one that we were referring to earlier, that talks about it might have been a different document. I'm not 100% sure, but it talks about the reason that they can't come out and say anything about ETs is because of religion, right? And religion indoctrination, which I think is the laziest excuse.
It's lame.
The book of excuses.
If blame the Christians and the Jews, to me, it's a species of that. It's lame. And here's why. If you look at religion, particularly the 3 monotheisms, each one of them, every bit of them, has traditions of other kinds of intelligent being than us. The Muslims have their jinn, the Jews have their cherubim and seraphim, and the Christians have their angels and demons. And oh, by the way, apparently in all 3 traditions, they can shapeshift and assume physical form. And oh, lo and behold, Native American Indians believe the same thing.
Skinwalker, right?
Yeah. So the question is not whether religion is going to be the problem, but why are you scientific materialists such a problem? We don't have a problem with it. You're the people that have the problem with it. Why? Is it because maybe all of these traditions might therefore have to be reconsidered, that there's an element of truth in them that you guys don't want to deal with because you don't know how, because you're all a bunch of materialists? Maybe.
Yeah, when you look at the book of Ezekiel, right?
Bingo.
The craft that Ezekiel saw coming out of the sky with the 3 heads and the rotating, spinning.
Even
balls.
better, if you look at the book of Ezekiel, how is Lucifer described?
How's Lucifer?
Listen, thy tabrets and pipes were made perfect in thee. Now, what's a tabret? It's a membrane. What's a pipe? Well, it could be intestines, blood vessels. It could be pipes like on a mechanical device, just like a membrane. In other words, the description is of a being, an intelligent one, very intelligent, that has some sort of physical manifestation. And it ain't human.
And then when you look at the book of Enoch too, the verses in there saying that the angels of heaven seen the women of earth fit,
Bingo.
so they came down and mated with them. That, that's telling you that there's
And lo and
other
behold,
beings
we
out there.
also find similar stories in Mesopotamia.
Yeah.
So,
so the religion excuse is completely blown out of the water.
To me, it's, they've got to find somebody to blame. But the real problem is that I think is as I said, I think you've got a bunch of materialists that simply cannot and do not want to admit that they might be wrong. And then that means they have to go there. And they don't know how to go there. They have so totally cut themselves off from the bulk of human philosophical and religious tradition, they don't know how to handle it. This is why their narratives tend to collapse so quickly. Gee, go figure.
Yeah, they've done it to themselves.
They've done it to themselves.
That's the way that I think that all of it has worked. We've been subverted and made to think that it's our idea to do it. And that's the way that the agendas have all gone. And then you have all the CIA counterintelligence people in the community to keep everybody on track, that it's ETs, that they're visiting us from other planets. And
isn't it a heck of a lot of fun to watch them scramble to create all of this wonderful entertainment? Just, go guys. I'm constantly amazed at this. The theater is getting to be very obvious. I mean, what better thing than a president that can't even complete a sentence? It was bad enough with George Nuclear Bush. No, Mr. President, it's nuclear, not nuclear. It goes on and on.
Yeah, you can understand Ozzy Osbourne more than you can understand.
That's right. That's good. Yeah, right.
But yeah, we have. It's incredible to see the spin that they constantly switch up their. Particularly in this community, in the UFO community, they're constantly doing the shuffle, right? A lot of the CIA counterintelligence people, they're always trying to get out ahead, and eventually they're going to run out of material. So then they just start to make up material.
Oh, they're doing that. They're manufacturing material right now at a breathtaking pace, and the problem is they can't even keep their stories straight anymore. Yeah. Just look at President, or I should say, alleged President Brandon Enko. Oh, if you get the injection, you're not going to have any problem with this stuff. Dang. Yeah. It's delightful to watch because they're contradicting themselves now. It used to take 5 or 6 years for them to contradict themselves. Now they've got that window of contradiction down to a mere year, and it's going to keep getting narrower and narrower.
I think so, until it inevitably collapses. I think that's a perfect place to kind of wrap it up. Dr. Joesph, thank you so much for
thanks for having me on. It's been a lot of fun.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. Where can let people know where they can find more of your work or purchase your books?
You can go to my website, and you can actually order my books directly off the website. It'll come from Amazon, but I get a little extra kick if it's coming off of my website. But my website is www. Oh, hush, little girl here. It's okay. My dog is whining. She wants to go out. It's www.giza-star, all one word.com. Yeah, okay, Shiloh.
I would recommend picking up Joseph's books. He's got 33, I believe he said in the beginning of this, to pick from, and I have read Covert Wars and Breakaway Civilizations. but he has a bunch to pick from, and the links to his website and his information will be in the description of this video. For everyone else, thanks for watching and listening. Much love to everyone in the chat. Please be sure to hit the thumbs up button to help the channel out in the YouTube algorithm. Share, subscribe, hit the bell icon as well for notifications. Again, thank you so much, Dr. Farrell, for coming
My
on.
pleasure. Do me a favor and let me know when you get your link posted, because I like to post it on my website as well.
Awesome. I would love to do that. And I would love to have you back on
Sure.
sometime so we can chat more.
Sure.
Awesome. Thank you. And
Thank
for
you.
everyone else, remember, we're not only in a spiritual war, but a war on humanity. Stay aware, stay alert, keep loving your heart for everyone. Stay safe out there. And if you can see through the illusion, you are the solution. See you guys next time.